Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Thank you for joining this GP Strategies webinar, where we'll explore best practices and innovative insights to help you and your organization improve performance.
So I'm really excited about today's panel discussion, Unlocking Leadership Potential, Strategies for Effective Leadership Development Programs. We're going to be exploring key insights and best practices for designing and implementing leadership development initiatives that are truly making an impact. So get ready for this really great conversation with our industry experts, where we're going to also uncover actionable strategies for fostering leadership growth at every level. So again, thank you for being here. And I really want to introduce you to our moderator for today, Lisa Fagan. Lisa is not only my colleague at GP Strategy, she's also our Vice President of Leadership Development and Inclusion. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Kim. It's great to be here with everyone. I'm super excited about today's session and being able to host two of our clients as well as one of my colleagues. And I really appreciate you taking the time and making the space for today's webinar. So I'd love to go ahead and get started with introducing the folks that are joined us here today, and that will be sharing their experiences with their learning and development initiatives. So first with Lynn Wright, who is the Senior Manager of Talent Management at Illumina. Lynn brings more than 15 years of experience in talent management and development. Her remit is to cultivate high-impact learning culture within Illumina, and she supports a global leadership development audience, performance enablement, and change management. Lynn's focus is on leveraging scalable talent development solutions to enable her internal business units to build future-ready teams. Welcome, Lynn. Thank you for being here today. Courtney Lorak, who is the Director of Talent Development, the Talent Development Portfolio at Unum. In this capacity, Courtney leads the advancement of learning curriculum and standard development offerings. She's responsible for creating and managing a portfolio of learning interventions that support individual and leader development while ensuring they align with organizational goals and strategies. So certainly no easy task. Courtney is also focused on scalable solutions, and we'll hear more about that as we chat today. So welcome, Courtney. And last but not least, I'd like to invite Dana Hall to turn her camera on and join us. Dana Hall is a learning consultant with GP Strategies, and she helps us with designing learning solutions. She takes a learner-centric approach to the designs that she puts forward to our clients. And she has supported both Illumina and Unum with their endeavors. So Dana's going to represent kind of the broader audience of our clients, if you will, and some of our point of view around these types of initiatives. So welcome, Dana. All right, so before we go into the Q&A with our panelists, I wanted to sort of set the stage and provide a common foundation for language that we're going to be using as we talk today. So I'm going to invite Dana to help with defining just two terms that you're going to hear a lot as we talk, and those terms are platform and digital. So Dana, would you want to take a stab at saying what we mean by those terms when we refer to them today?
Certainly. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Pleasure to be here. So we will be talking an awful lot about digital learning experiences and how those are experienced on GP's Intrepid platform. So just very briefly to give you some insight, there's a whole lot of usage of the word digital in the L&D community, and certainly in the L&D world, can mean a lot of different things. The way GP talks and thinks about digital is very interactive experience. So our Intrepid Learning Platform is a website that we host our learning experiences on. We call them digital learning experiences, one, because they are asynchronous and they are hosted on the Intrepid site. While they will not be, the reason they are not going to be kind of thought of as maybe an e-learning experience only, which is probably one of the more common ways that digital is referred to or thought about, is because the Intrepid Learning Platform hosts a wide variety of different modalities and learning experiences that participants will come together in a cohort style to interact with each other and engage in those experiences. So that can include video, audio, discussions, engaging in live events within the platform itself. And it can also include e-learning interactions, right? So we bring them all together for this asynchronous cohort-based experience on the Intrepid site or the Intrepid Learning platform, to create, as engaging experience as possible.
Yeah. And so just for the audience, don't want you to think that by any means this is going to be a commercial about Intrepid. It happens to be, where our programs sit on that platform from a GP perspective, but I can tell you that many of our clients either launch from different platforms, and we're going to define platform for you in a second. They launch from other platforms, or they might be using other platforms to do exactly what Courtney and Lynn have done in their organizations in the way of learning experiences. So just wanted to create some common language there around what we refer to when we say digital. Dana, when we talk about platform, we're really just talking about the vast majority of different types of platforms, right? We're talking about LMSs, learning experience platform. It's not just the platform that we used in the design of these specific programs that both Courtney and Lynn have used. It could mean LMSs and other things, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we do try to regularly integrate with the technologies and sites that clients are utilizing, including, HR, things such as Workday, including their LMSs. So it's a very integrative experience that we incorporate with Intrepid.
Yeah. So when you hear those terms, at least now you'll know what we're talking about, and you'll be on the same page and not be confused about how that might look differently in your organization. All right. So I want to engage the audience to participate here with us. And I'm going to ask you to pop in the chat an answer to a question. I would love to know if either individual contributor or leadership development are priorities today in your organization. So if you could just pop in the chat whether or not those either both or one or the other are priorities, that'd be great to hear. Good. I'm seeing some wonderful responses and everybody saying both. So thank you for that. Let me go ahead and get started with asking Lynn. I'm going to ask you both the same question, but I'll start with you, Lynn, because you're directly to my right on my screen. So Lynn, how did you get started? We're going to be looking at this from an evolution perspective, right? Where did you start? How did you make changes along the way? And then maybe how you're measuring the success, and then what does the future look like? So for now, what was happening in your organization that prompted you to be looking at the need for leadership, a leadership program? What was happening in the business?
Yeah, no, and even just the brief mention of like digital and platforms, that's the fun stuff, right? Like the how we get it done. But for us, it really did originate at a much larger transformational effort. So a few years ago, this was actually the when and the why I joined Illumina was part of this project. But to really align what we were doing with our people to fit more closely with our mission. If we're going to improve human health through the power of the genome, that's a really big mission. It's our people and our extraordinary leaders that are going to get us there. And so really looking at, do we have the talent engine to support that? So looking at leaders across the organization, needing to really elevate the capability and skill of everyone to kind of meet this evolving workplace that we're in post-pandemic, this really competitive talent market. And so when we were looking at like, what do we need to do? We had kind of a group really laser focusing on what are the capabilities and what do we need to do to get there. But we were also thinking a lot about audiences. So, what do our senior leaders need? What do our frontline leaders need? And what are they telling us about what they need? So doing a lot of listening as well, really trying to understand what they expect from us as an organization. And so where we really landed was we need to create several programs that do quite a bit more for our organization than we were doing in the past. Those high touch, high potential programs certainly had great outcomes. But if we wanted to get all of our important leaders through that, it would take more than a decade of that work, right? So we really wanted, when we were focusing on the what, let's scale this. Let's really reach a lot of leaders in a short amount of time. Let's elevate the capability across the board, not just for certain talent groups, and then really look at creating great leader-employee experiences along the way. And I think the final piece of that is thinking too, just about our employer value proposition. Are we investing in a significant and visible way to really show our leaders how much we care about them? So lots of really good strategic stuff to tie to.
Yeah, for sure. And it sounds like you were, if I may say,
Mhm.
I'm hearing two key themes there in what you're
Mhm.
sharing. One is the organization had determined leaders were
Mhm.
the pathway to future
Yeah.
success for the business. That's what I'm sort of hearing you describe. And then you wanted to make sure, it sounds like you wanted to make sure that it was an enriching experience for them. So you were looking for them to give you guidance on the design, it sounds like.
Yes, absolutely. So, taking our standard listening, what are they telling us in their engagement survey about what they want for development and growth? And then really focusing even along the design program, meeting with those groups, meeting with HR business partners in a really specific way to find out, what types of skills are you looking for? What does a good experience look like to you? And how can we fit that into our need to scale it really widely? So, yeah, it was very employee focused and leader focused so that we could get it right.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, I'm going to take this question, same question to Courtney, but I'm going to come back to you because there's lots more that I want to unpack there. But Courtney, what was happening within your organization that prompted you to think about, in this case, where it sounds like both of you had a situation where leader development was the focus? Certainly, yeah. So, Courtney, can you answer that question for us?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, for anyone who's not familiar with Unum, it's a financial services organization. We have over 11,000 employees, so a large employee population, and we certainly were listening to anecdotal feedback about a need for our managers specifically to have some more streamlined development. We historically have had some really solid, high touch, high potential programming, similarly to what Lynn mentioned. And those have been really successful, but they only hit a very, very small percentage of the population. And we needed something scalable. And it was an interesting time period for us because we were making an effort to make more data driven decisions, and this was really coming out of anecdotal feedback. And so there was a really big effort that I ended up leading with one of our executives to do some data research into our manager effectiveness, and we uncovered that we needed something that was really scalable and something that was accessible to all of our managers. So that's really where we ended up narrowing our focus on specifically the Leadership Essentials program with GP Strategies, but it's evolved into other things since then. But that's how we ended up in that space. And since then, it's evolved into helping us make some other bigger decisions and more scalable solutions.
Yeah, yeah. So, time frame wise, and this is to both you, Courtney and Lynn, it sounds like these discussions were happening within your organization, certainly post pandemic. And what, couple years ago, a year ago, kind of time frame are we talking about here?
2021-ish for us.
Okay.
21. Yep. 21, 22.
Because kind of a consistent theme I'm hearing in both of your stories is that a movement away from what would have been considered traditional learning, instructor-led training in classrooms, smaller groups. Yeah, is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Linda, maybe, maybe not. I'm sort of hearing you.
In a sense, I think we didn't want to position it, nor did we believe it would be a replacement for those things. We really saw, especially with, we're a very global company. We have a lot of different functional groups. People do a lot of different types of work. You're talking lab groups, you're talking, manufacturing groups, HR, corporate. And so we really wanted to diversify just how are we meeting leaders where they are. So not, hey, we want to only go scalable or only go digital, but how can we increase the number of options available so that everyone has access, so
Yeah,
that was kind of the positioning. And
yeah.
we will talk more about how well that positioning worked.
Yeah, that we will. We will talk more about that for sure. And so, what I love about what you just shared, Lynn, is that that is exactly what we're hearing within GP Strategies today. During the pandemic, that was absolutely no way, no how could we bring people together in a face-to-face environment. So that was the advent, a lot of these creative approaches to doing learning and development, right? But we're seeing more and more today a bit more of that hybrid approach that you just described, Lynn. So, and Courtney, you're nodding your head yes. So it sounds like the same for you. Yeah.
It is, yeah, very similar.
Okay, so scalable one option, but still taking into consideration other approaches to development as well. All right, so what considerations were you taking into your decision-making process? What were the things that you had to consider when you were considering this scalable approach to leadership development that you happened upon? So I'll start with Courtney on that one. Sorry, Lynn. Go ahead.
The first thing we had to consider, honestly, was the vendors that we were evaluating working with. We really needed someone who could be flexible with the customization or contextualization.
Mhm.
We also needed someone who would be patient with our contracting process because our process is not it's not fast. So a vendor that would be comfortable working through those pieces with us.
Mhm.
And then when it came time to really design a program that was going to work for us, it needed to be very consumable. The individuals going through this program do not have a ton of time. And so it needed to be able to be consumable. It had to be very flexible around a variety of different schedule needs, including different time zones. Um, and so for us, the semi-synchronous approach works really well, where primarily work or the learning is absorbed asynchronously, but then there are live engagement opportunities to get people connected.
Okay. How about you, Lynn? What were some of the considerations that you had to think about at that time?
I feel like I should double check and make sure Courtney and I don't work for the same company. It's sounding very familiar. I think a lot of it was, really kind of looking at, what's scalable, what are the options that are out there. The need for customization, I think, was just so critical to us. We know that although credibility is a big piece of our plan, is, we have a lot of people who are very educated and they really want to know that the development and the information they're getting is coming from a credible, well-researched source, right? So looking at that, but on the flip side, there's that contradiction of it also needs to be very specific and custom to Illumina, really wanting to be able to see themselves in these ideas, in these examples. And a lot of the vendor options didn't allow us to even do something as simple as change the name of the program to kind of fit how we were branding it internally. There was very limited opportunity to insert our own values language or our own strategic concepts. And so for us, that became one of the most important pieces of the selection because we wanted that experience to resonate and not feel like, oh, hey, I went through this, but now I'm back. It really should fit into the continuum of what people see in their regular work. So I think for that piece, one of the biggest considerations, and I think that fed into a lot of the other kind of design decisions and the design elements that we were looking for in terms of, I love, Courtney, the idea of consumability. How does this content come into the hands of our learners and how does it stay alive?
Yeah, it's interesting because you both, you're right, your organizations are very similar in some of the considerations that you made. One of the things that I heard, Courtney, you mentioned was the importance of consistency. So it's striking this balance of having something that really feels and looks like your organization. It doesn't look like you're stepping outside of your organization to experience something and then come back and try to apply those skills. It just really is embedded. But also having a consistent approach to how you deployed the training. So thank you for sharing those thoughts. Let me come over to the audience and over to you, Dana. So just want to put in the chat, I'm going to ask the audience a similar question. Are there other considerations in addition to what Courtney and Lynn have shared when you're thinking about embarking on a leadership development initiative? What are some of the other things that you have to take into consideration? And Dana, were there anything that Lynn and Courtney did not mention that we've seen from other clients relative to some of the considerations before making a decision on how to approach this?
Yeah, no, certainly. Thank you. I would say absolutely the number one thing is like determining how our program content fits their level of leader. So we really take a deep dive with clients to determine what level of leader they're working with, what their, we try to pull that same information from our clients that they're pulling from their leaders so that we can find those opportunities to specify, customize, and contextualize our content as much as humanly possible for them. to make it feel like it really is theirs, like the participants are absolutely still working within the organization. They might be on their computer kind of asynchronously on an external site, but it feels ruthlessly relevant to what they are experiencing in their role and what they know to be coming down the pipe and things that they know that they want to be prepared. They want to be prepared to face as leaders. That is absolutely the number one thing for, so for example, for aspiring leaders, and we'll cover from aspiring leaders to more senior executive leadership. Aspiring leaders, we think about they want to be short, sharp, specific approach to what we're providing them. And they want that kind of peek around the corner, that insight into what it actually means to be a leader. So we work to build those experiences, and that approach to their learning is very specific to that audience. And then with mid-level or senior leaders, they need the opportunity to come together, right? To slow down, to reflect, to communicate with each other, to share challenges, experiences, best practices, those types of things. So that approach is built into, working with that level of leader.
Perfect. So a couple comments are popping up in the chat that are really interesting. So Alice is saying you really have to look at your audience. And I heard both of you, Lynn and Courtney, say that you were specifically looking for feedback from your target audience in the design. So you're hearing some affirmation from folks in the audience about that. And Lynn is saying, we have to take into consideration post-training performance support. So we're going to talk about that actually in just a couple of minutes here. But one of the things that we've also found has been a consideration and a challenge for folks as they look at their design and how they want to deploy is this notion of platforms. What platform do we use? Or we already have multiple platforms, and how do we integrate that? Or we don't want to take on yet another platform. So, that factor comes into play. Lynn, how were you taking platforms into consideration at that time? And how did you sort of reconcile that issue?
Yeah, for us, that was a really important piece, just kind of understanding which technologies would work well with ours and which wouldn't. Ultimately, we wanted a couple of really high priority items. Number one, kind of looking for a consumer grade experience. Just because it's work and it's your training doesn't mean that it shouldn't be smooth and it shouldn't work properly all the time, and it shouldn't be easy to access from any device that you're looking at. So that was an important piece. And then the other part was, does it kind of fit the type of learning that we were looking at? There were some where, hey, it promised micro learning or this really blended experience, but it didn't offer that within one technology. Maybe the same program required 3 different types of technology. So we wanted something that, would kind of integrate with the experience really well, but would also integrate with our learners, because that was kind of, I think the final piece was the distraction sometimes of having to click a link that's in an email to take you to a platform that you don't normally access. A perfect program can be derailed by the number of clicks it takes to get there. That's just the world that we live in. And so we wanted to make sure that that was part of the experience, that we didn't have to worry about. We could focus on the content and the effectiveness.
And not to get too far down into the technology weed, but did you resolve that through something like single sign-on, or how did you resolve that issue?
Yeah, so we did single sign-on, of course, a huge component of this, especially with knowing that people are going to access this from computers, from on-site, off-site, mobile. But the other part was really making sure that it integrated into Workday. So we used Workday Learning to even get people enrolled. That's how they sign up for the program. They don't start using the Intrepid platform until they're in it, so we're really kind of looking at how can we seamlessly blend the promotion and communication experience to the tools that we're already using, both before and after the program ends. And that way kind of fitting it into, even from the chat, that post-training performance support and being able to integrate it. So, and that was honestly so simple. For some projects, Courtney could probably relate, where it's like, oh my gosh, just getting the single sign-on or some of these things stood up is such a pain. But for us, that was just delightfully one of the easier parts of the setup experience.
That's really great to hear. Courtney, same question to you. What were the platform challenges that you faced, and how did you look to resolve those?
Well, I'm chuckling because we had 2 single sign-on projects going on at the same time, and this one went in like 2 weeks. It was done, and the other one took almost 2 months. So it was a much smoother process. Um, So what I find really interesting actually is that when we started this back in 2021, we were less concerned with the number of platforms and the way that they were accessed. That has really increased for us over the years. So the Russian-Ukraine war actually increased our cybersecurity concerns. That's when we actually implemented SSO for the programs that we had with GP strategies. And then we started to narrow our focus on the number of platforms that learners needed to access. And we started to lead with integration with Workday, that was essentially almost a requirement in the vendor partners that we were willing to work with, or where we were willing to house any kind of learning whatsoever. So that's really actually been an evolution for us over the last 4 years. And so if we didn't have a partner that was willing to evolve alongside, that would have been extremely challenging. And one thing that I didn't know at the time when we implemented, our first program back in 2021 was how important it was going to be for us to have something that we were going to be able to implement a number of different programs and just terminology and models and things that were going to sort of weave a consistent experience across our learning landscape. And that's something that we've been able to do. Part of that is because the digital support aligns with the direction that we're going. So it's become very important.
Right, that's interesting. I didn't realize that it was the Russian-Ukraine war that started a lot of those concerns. I mean, data protection has been an issue, but I didn't realize it got heightened at that point in time. So thank you for that. Okay, so ultimately, all of these factors came into consideration in your decision-making process. Was there any one particular thing that you would say was the tipping point that said, okay, now I know the answer, this is what I'm going to do? Or was it really just all of these things taken into consideration? There's no wrong answer to that, but just curious if there was a particular thing that's like, okay, now I can make my decision. This is the tipping point. Was there, Courtney?
No, I will collect information until there's no information left to collect. So sometimes I have to cut myself off, but no, I think at some point we just determined that we knew that we needed to address, in particular, our manager fundamentals. We wanted to have a fundamental manager training. This fit and checked off all of our priority boxes. And so this is where we started. And I think what actually ended up happening was it was almost a little bit of an agile approach where, we implemented. After that first cohort, we revised a little. We went with the next cohort, we revised a little. We actually made a major revision at one point by adding in a whole completely customized coaching module. And so I think, it was actually a much better approach to just kind of say, we've got these priority items and this is going to work and we're going to do it, and then continue to evolve along the way.
Right. Okay, so an iterative approach and
Mhm.
having the ability to iterate with a partner was probably it sounds like the most important thing to you.
It was
Ultimately.
absolutely critical. Yeah.
Lynn, any thoughts there?
Yeah, very similar. I think at the time when we first kind of started, we started with one program. The Leadership Acceleration Program was actually our first. And some of that came together really quickly because it was like, okay, well, in order for us to deliver the first cohort in this timeline, we need to lock something in. We've done a lot of exploration. We need to do that. But for us, it was really the confidence of, hey, if we lock in this partnership and this general overview, we now can take the steps to customize and to really build. And for us, that was exactly where we wanted to be, was, hey, knowing that we have a solution, but also knowing that the customization process was going to be the most important part for the success of this program. So we went into that with a lot of optimism. So,
Yeah. Great, great. All right. So now you both described, all of the challenges that you faced and how you ultimately arrived at the decision on how you were going to approach your initiative. But no initiative is perfect right out of the box, right? And you, Courtney, specifically talked about an iterative approach. What I'd love to hear from both of you is, in looking back now, today, what blind spots did you have? And what would you say was, if I had it all to do over again, I would have considered this because I didn't see that one coming. How would you answer that question? Lynn, let me start with you.
Yeah, for us, it was really about the change management. I think this transformation, it's so easy to talk energetically about it. It's expansion, it's new, it's investment, it's adding on, right? There's a lot of what's in it for me, for our learners. So I think we were surprised that some of that story didn't just prove itself out in the narrative and the communication. So as we were trying to get to people to really adopt and embrace this digital approach and really kind of say like, oh, hey, this is this virtual experience. Our everything we talked about, it was not necessarily reflected in what kind of the user experience was. People were still like, okay, but this is a really, this doesn't do the same thing as an in-person. You just can't compare the two. You can't possibly replace the feeling of being in a room with, a group of people for a week. And so for us, that really kind of challenged, okay, how do we communicate? Like it really challenged a lot about our employee messaging process, because we were just like, oh, we really thought this was clear. We really thought we got this understanding across. What we don't want is for these like misconceptions to impact the user experience. We want to always deliver on what we're promising. And so really needing to further clarify and further work with, the GP strategies team, on, hey, how are we messaging things every step of the way to make it clear that, this is a part of your development experience, but it's not the end all. And, how does it fit? Because even as we were kind of reflecting, and it was very iterative for us as well, looking at every single cohort as what can we do better? Even the people who rated the program the highest and were most satisfied still put in the comments, yeah, but I wish it was, in person, or I wish I had an in-person component to kind of fall back on. So, so for us, we didn't realize just quite how uphill and how long-term that part of the change leadership is going to be.
Yeah, great. That's powerful. Courtney, how would you answer that question? What blind spots did you have?
So mine's actually twofold. So one is that I wish, in retrospect, I had known how important it was going to be for us to have something that was going to connect the entire learning landscape. So where we are now, we have multiple GP strategies programs, and also, license the coaching model, the X model, and so that we can incorporate those into other elements of our learning. And it really has connected a lot of the learning, and it's created a shared language across the company. Um, and if I had known that back in 2021 when we had just started this, I think there may have been a stronger effort to kind of look at what might we be able to implement all at one time to really roll that out together and ensure that we're having that shared language from the get-go. There were some hard transitions with some of it, and I think if we had had that reinforcement from, senior leadership down to individual contributor, as opposed to just starting with the manager level and then gradually plugging in the other levels, that it might have been more successful. It's hard to say. We are in a really good place with all of the programming that we have and the way that it connects. So it's hard to say that it would be better than where it is, but it might have been easier on us in the learning space.
Yeah.
The other piece, this might actually touch a little bit on what's next, is the measurement. Because I do, in retrospect, wish we had maybe had a better way of measuring behavior change. Um, and if that had been implemented early on, we may have a more effective way of measuring that behavior change.
Yeah. Okay. And Courtney, you're getting a question from in the chat from Craig, and so I'm going to do my best here to see if I think I'm doing this question justice in the way he's asking it. So he was remarking on your comment about had you were you to do it all over again, you might have found a way to perhaps create that common ground, that common foundation of language. And he's saying, why didn't you do more of his term was big bang implementation from the get go? So
Sure.
maybe it's sort of I think he's saying a big launch, set the stage, create the common language. What were the reasons for not doing it at that time?
Yeah, pretty standard reasons. Budget, first of all. Also, we tend to be a bit risk averse. And so typically things roll out relatively slowly. We start with a pilot, see how that goes. If it goes well, then we'll go with the next cohort. But we don't typically roll out new learning interventions,
Yeah, yeah,
multiples at one time. It can be fairly disruptive to a number of our business areas. Not all of them, but some of them
yeah.
would give pushback if we tried to do that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And Craig is thanking you for your candor. It's someone's asking about measurement strategy. We're going to shift to that in just a moment. If you wouldn't mind just hanging here with us for just a couple more minutes as we discuss two other things before we get to measurement. But one thing I just want to comment on and invite the folks in the audience to react to this theme around sort of trepidation. I might even go as far as to use the term fear of doing something that's quite different like this. Lynn, you remarked about it, and Courtney, you have as well. Um, yes, I get the whole issue around budget and investing in something new and different, but how much fear did you have to overcome? And so I put that question, actually, let me phrase that differently. Is fear an issue? For you as you consider this type of initiative. So I'm going to ask the folks in the audience to respond to that. I already know the answer from Courtney and Lynn, as you've commented. And Dana, what I'll ask you to do is to share from the perspective of other clients that we work with, folks that we know in the marketplace. Is fear an issue of doing something different and new, as opposed to traditional instructor-led?
Sure. Yeah. To be totally honest, once we get into conversations with clients about what they're looking for, we don't find that it may be a minor issue, right? They're reaching out to us because they are already kind of accepting and trying to embrace the need to fill this gap, right? And many of them are on the exact same page as Lynn and Courtney. They are not looking to make this big diversion away and create an entirely new approach to learning, like not divert away from in person in any way, right? Oftentimes, they are looking to integrate an additional element into the culture to better incorporate and bring everyone together. And that can be for multiple reasons, and some of them they've both already talked about. But because they're very organization and business focused, there often is not a ton of fear. What there sometimes is just a lot of questions and clarity needed on what it actually looks like. What does it actually mean, so that they can make sure that everyone has the right expectations, because it is still something new, and it may even still be something a little different from what their audience and their leaders have experienced before, in a way that they have interacted, with learning and development and with training before. So to make sure that their experience is good, even if they are open to it, that clarity, that communication, that very proactive approach and kind of ready plan to go forward is something that they lean on us for a lot. We make sure that we, work with them and take the time necessary to help them come up with those different approaches and give them all the information and background that they might need to really set up the launch for success.
Yeah. Yeah, especially through comms, right? I mean, comms are particularly,
Huge.
and I heard Courtney and Lynn
Yeah.
also saying. All right, so I've seen a lot of eagerness in the chat for people asking questions around how did we measure the success. So Lynn, let me start with you. What kinds of things did you do to measure the effectiveness of your initiative?
Yeah, so for us, because we were starting from scratch in a lot of ways, we weren't kind of using old program standards, we were standing up a lot of new things. We had the opportunity to really refine a strategy that made sense with kind of what we were looking for, but also could really ask more of these programs. So it was a really exciting time to be looking at impact. And so with measurement, we covered a lot of the learner-oriented ground. So what are the program outcomes? Are people completing it? Are they enrolling in it? What was the satisfaction like? But we were really intentional about being able to make a continued business case for these programs, just with the level of investment in getting them stood up, looking at the long-term investment of continuing to offer them for learners. We wanted to make sure that we could really defend this decision long-term, knowing that the business conditions change. One year you're in a growth cycle and the other year you're in a pause cycle. And so looking at things like, skill growth, that was something that was built into a lot of these programs was, assessments that would help us understand the before and after with how people were feeling about their skills and how their managers were feeling. We went beyond that too, to really be looking at what is the engagement level of the leaders who attend these programs in the short and long term? What is the turnover rate, for these leaders compared to their peers? So it was pretty broad, and we took a lot of measurement into account. So happy to spend 2 hours if anyone's interested, but I'll let you dig in, Lisa, if you want to.
Yeah, well, measurement's a tough thing, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody wants to measure, but rarely can we either take the time or invest to get to an ROI type analysis. So, we often find just from a GP perspective that it is people are satisfied once they start to get anecdotal information about change, the impact to the business and the change in behavior. So, so it's interesting to hear how you all addressed it. Courtney, how about you? How did you look at measurement around the effectiveness of this?
Yeah, this is an area where I think we still strive for perfection. I'm sure many people in the audience are familiar with the Kirkpatrick model. So thinking about the 4 levels. So we're always capturing level 1 to really see if the training was engaging and useful. So there's always a survey that, gets like the Net Promoter Score and gets their feedback about how the experience of the learning was. And we're really pretty good about capturing level 2 with the pre and the post engagement self-assessments that Lynn mentioned, where it really is their ability to assess how do they feel about a skill set or a capability or a behavior going into this learning, and then how do they feel about it coming out of the learning.
Yeah.
I think what we're striving right now to capture is the true behavior change and the results that come out of that behavior change. Definitely harder to measure. We are really focused right now on a whole skills-based talent management transformation across the organization. And so I do think as we get more refined in that space and find more effective ways to measure our true skill proficiency growth, that will integrate itself with the programs and our ability to see how the programs have impacted the skill proficiency growth and then where that's impacting the results.
In the business, right?
Correct.
John is agreeing with you here in the chat. He's saying behavior change is hard to measure, but it's the true test of improvement and change. So I have worked with some clients who have been sort of pleased to stop at, or at least take into consideration this notion of predisposition of behavior change. So, and that through post assessments, right? Are people willing to try some of the skills that they've just learned and put them into practice? And I want to come over to you, Dana. Are there other things, strategies that you've seen our clients employ relative to measuring the effectiveness?
Certainly, yeah. GP comes out of the gate with many different opportunities to pull data, to take a deep dive into learner interactions, engagement within the platform, so that we can provide clients with as much information and data as possible to help them build that picture that they're looking for as far as evaluating effectiveness, evaluating applicability, and things of that nature. We have had clients start and this I see this happen more often than not. They're just very, very focused on the implementation and making sure that this becomes available. So they kind of start out, of the gates, maybe more of a general evaluative approach. And once things kind of get rolling, usually right after the pilot, maybe one cohort after that, they start saying, okay, now this is what we realize we're able to tell. What other information can we pull? How else can we tighten up our approach to learning within this program to be able to pull even more information going forward? The opportunity to, again, customize and contextualize what is included from the organization's perspective is almost unlimited, right? Like you can make it as specific as you need to for leadership expectations, for role requirements, for skills and abilities specific to your role. It can really be as specific as you need. So that way, once people have gone through it, you can pull data that is immediately applicable to what they're doing and what you want to know if they can do. And certainly that comes on top of, what is pre-built, right? So GP measures for efficiency, effectiveness, and impact, right? So learner activity, usage trends, how many points and badges they're earning, their attendance, some of the things that Lynn and Courtney have also mentioned. So level 1 feedback surveys, participation rate, interaction in the live events. We can also look at return rate on pieces of content, like per piece of content, right? What participants are, which pieces of content participants are giving likes, they have the ability to do that. And then there's additional, even deeper, like kind of optional pieces that are available: self-assessments, 360 assessments, manager assessments. And those 360s are really integral as well, because they come with, you have the opportunity to do a post-assessment, for any time frame once the program is completed, to get an even, longer term, wider view on how, giving them time to apply and practice some of these things they've learned. How does that actually look? Now how has your skill changed? So just so many opportunities, all of which, at least a handful of my clients have utilized all, if not some of them. Just depending on what are the requirements, how deep are they looking to go, what kind of story do they need to be able to build. So
yeah, to varying degrees. Thank you, Dana. And I'm going to ask the chat folks to pop in the chat. Are there other measurement techniques, tools, strategies that you haven't heard us already address that you would use in your organization? So please put in the chat any other measurement tools or approaches that you have used or recommend. And there's a question from Craig, and I'm going to pose this to both Lynn and Courtney. The question is, so this one's not an easy one. So it's, have you utilized outside data for comparison for your measurements and evaluations to have a quote goal for your training effectiveness? So I think it's benchmarking, if I were to put it in a simplistic term there. Have you used outside data?
So outside the organization, I would say no, but outside the program, yes. So we really, I think, and maybe it's tying something to something that Dana had mentioned, which is, our ability to kind of tie some of these things to the organizational skills, roles, concepts is unlimited. And so we really looked at, for each of the program, we actually customized all of the program assessments for our offerings. So not just taking the standard program assessment, but actually including an assessment that was not just for the program. It incorporated our leadership model and assessments that we use with other leaders who haven't or wouldn't take our programs. And so really comparing learners to their outside peers as a way to make sure that we are achieving the things we want to because of the program, not just because of other things. And so really looking outside of the program experience to evaluate, and also looking longer term. So also looking at, we don't just measure before and after the program is done. We also look at participants 6 months after they've completed it. We take another assessment to really kind of standardize, is the growth we expect happening over the long term? Why or why not? And then really kind of, I think, comparing that to anything we find as we continue to look at the skills of our leadership group. So a year is a long time in the evolution of corporate responsibility, things are needed from our leaders now that weren't required a year ago.
Right.
So we do kind of have those kind of standard ways of looking at skill and capability. But I'm very curious, Craig, if you're thinking of specific data or comparison, if there's tools that you use to measure your leaders against externally. So.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, we'll make sure that we make those connections, certainly post on that. That's one of the beauties of these webinars is it does create some conversations beyond the confines of the webinar today. So Courtney, what thoughts would you share relative to using outside data?
Well, it's similar to Lynn. I mean, we do, in terms of outside data, use comparisons around the different business functions because there is a lot of variety there. And so, especially right now, as we're really trying to drill down into specific skills, we have a role in the company that is really a liaison between learning and the business function, and that role really helps us identify um, specific skills and the measurement of those skills and how they compare to the KPIs of the business area. And that's all data that we can use to inform maybe not as much of the effectiveness of the programs yet, more where we focus the programs. So, are we focusing on the right skills? And then I think the measurement comes after that. Where we do use some external data is we will pull in information from Gartner where it makes sense. We have pulled in external data from like PwC, Gallup. I mean, there are external resources that
Mhm.
do provide HBR sometimes has external data. Those do sometimes have comparison data. I just always have to think a little bit about, is it apples to apples? It's typically not. And so we just have to think about how that informs versus what we know to be true for our specific organization.
Great. Yeah, and likewise, from a GP perspective, for those are very well-respected resources that you just cited, Courtney, and we also take into consideration when we're doing development design along with some of our own research. So important, great question, Craig, to take some of those outside data sources into consideration. All right, we are coming close to the end of our time together, and there's one question that I want to put forward to Lynn and Courtney, and that is, what does the future look like? You've been on this journey, you've iterated, you've measured, you're seeing some success. Where do you go from here? Courtney, let me start with you.
Yeah, we're very focused right now on the employee experience across the board, but we're taking that to heart in the learning landscape. And so really thinking about simplifying the learner experience, personalizing the learning experience in a way that is sustainable and scalable. Digital platforms have a lot to do with that. The way that we're engaging with AI has a lot to do with that. And so these programs that we have that are really accessible to a broader population than the high touch, high potential programs that we used to rely on more heavily, these are sort of the way of the future for us to be able to provide learning that is at the right time for the learner, that is really focused more on role proficiency, not necessarily on developing to the next level, but providing what's needed at the time. So I think as we move forward, we're a bit more focused on making sure that we have those scalable solutions and that they can be personalized in sort of that digital landscape.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. Lynn, how would you answer that?
For us, it's so interesting that we started with a reflection of like when we started, right? Looking 2021, 22, because it feels like it's been 20 years since then. There's been so much happening outside of Illumina, inside of Illumina. We've experienced a lot of transformation. We've got a new executive team. We had a CEO change in that time. And so, when you look at culturally what's happening in the organization, we're really looking at, okay, what's needed going forward as we adopt new business strategies and things are changing in our marketplace. So we're really happy to have these programs. I think that's another thing that I wouldn't have anticipated being as important as it is knowing how much this was going to help us be resilient because we already have a vehicle for developing leaders that's established and branded and funded, quite frankly. We have this ability to, okay, now address what different what's different for leaders now than it used to be. And so, we can really iterate, and I see a lot of iteration coming for us in the next year and a half, both in, what's in these programs and how do we use them. And, kind of what are we looking to achieve from them? So it's nice. Yeah, I feel very comforted knowing that this is a tool we already have.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you both say, it's just more of the same, iterating, growing, evolving, and taking into consideration ways that you might, back to our earlier discussion, might utilize hybrid approaches as you go forward for different audiences. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, we're going to open the floor up for any questions from anyone that is participating that they might have. I've sort of infused our conversation with some of the questions as they've surfaced, but if there are others still lingering out there, we'd like to invite those now in the last couple minutes that we have. And while we're waiting for any questions that might surface, I do want to take a moment to thank Courtney and Lynn. You both have been fantastic in sharing your experiences. It's been tremendously helpful to folks out there. And Dana and I, when we're engaging with clients and they're looking at doing these kinds of initiatives, and they get nervous about, doing something quite different and what does digital look like? They're used to traditional. We always say to them, just talk to our clients because it's so much better than what we would say, right? I mean, what we would say would be coming from a designer's point of view and our research. But coming from clients who have lived it, breathed it, taken all factors into consideration, and evolved past any initial challenges, that's more impactful than anything that we could possibly say. So I thank you for sharing your stories. Both the good, the bad, and the ugly, but it sounds more good to me than anything else. So thank you, ladies. I don't see any questions coming in, so I am going to ask Kim to come back on and wrap us up.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa and Lynn and Courtney and Dana, of course. I also want to thank everybody who was on the call today for your participation and your time and attention. At the end of the session, we do ask that you take just a minute to fill out our survey because, like measurements for learning in our webinar sessions, we want your feedback and we want to make ourselves better. So we hope that you'll join us again for another one of our upcoming webinars. Again, thank you all for your time and attention. We hope you'll visit GP Strategies and sign up for a future session. I want to wish everyone on the call a wonderful and productive rest of your day. Thank you again.
Thanks, Kim.
This webinar was brought to you by GP Strategies. Together, we help organizations transform through their people. You can access more webinars or download additional resources by visiting the GP Strategies Resource Library. The link is on your screen and in the description.